Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 5th of July of 2025. Today we have a lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about another massive drone strike that took place mainly in the western part of Ukraine. According to information we have, the Russians attacked the city of Starokonstantinov, more precisely the airfield of the city, so we are talking about this territory. Usually the Ukrainians use this airfield for their F-16s and Su-24 that can attack deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation with cruise missile, let's say, of Storm Shadow of UK production. So we have a map, this is the map of approximate routes of Russian attacks, and if you take a look at this map, you're going to see at least three zones of Russian fire concentration. We are talking about the western part of Ukraine, this is the Starokonstantinov airfield. We are talking about the area along the river of Dnipro, mainly in the central part of the river, and we are talking about the Donbas arc operation. So we are talking about the cities like Konstantinovka, Pokrovsk, Drushkovka, probably the entire Pokrovsk agglomeration. So the Russians attacked the territory of Ukraine, and once again the Russians used a lot of drones. The Ukrainian sources reported that during the previous attack, the Russians used 322 drones, and as you can see, according to this article, according to the official statement of Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, the Russians didn't use missiles during this attack. So just drones, 322 drones to attack mainly the Starokonstantinov airfield. Later, more precisely, probably 5 or 10 or 20 minutes before I started making this video, several pro-Ukrainian monitoring resources reported that the Russians carry out multiple Kinzhal hypersonic missile strike. Some sources reported that the Russians attacked the Starokonstantinov airfield with 2 Kinzhal missiles. Some sources reported that the Russians used up to 4 missiles. Most likely the Russians were trying to destroy as many as possible aircrafts, warehouses probably of the armored forces of Ukraine. Anyway, the situation, as we can see, is very critical because we see that Ukrainians can't show any resistance to the Russian missiles and drones. Just yesterday, the Russians carried out another massive missile and drone strike. Yesterday, the Russians attacked the city of Kiev. We saw this map yesterday. Today, we got another map. Yesterday, Russians used 550 drones and missiles altogether. Today, the Russians used 322. It's very difficult to say how many missiles and drones the Russians are going to use during this upcoming night. So this is the reason why Zelensky was asking Donald Trump to increase the air defense capabilities. Zelensky most likely will accept some compromises with the Russian Federation in favor of improvement of the entire capabilities of Ukrainian air defense system, because we see that this air defense system of Ukraine is at the poorest level since the beginning of the special military operation. But if you ask my opinion, I'm not sure that currently the Western countries are able to improve the air defense system of the armed forces of Ukraine, because Russians use hundreds of drones every single day, and they are very cheap, telling the truth, and I'm not sure that sometimes it's smart to use, let's say, Patriot systems for the purpose to bring down all these drones. It's too expensive. Anyway, let's continue. Let's wait the upcoming night. Most likely another big strike is going to happen, at least with drones. Now let's discuss the situation along the line of combat contact. Probably these days the most important updates are coming from the northeastern part of the Kharkiv Oblast, where the Russians suddenly began their offensive operation, most likely with the purpose to cut this pocket, this northeastern part of Kharkiv region. We're talking about the territory a bit along the river of Volcha, in the area of the city of Volchansk, along the Pechenegi water reservoir, the river of Oskol, and the line between the settlements of Novy Burluk, let's say, and the river of Oskol or the city of Kupiansk. Now the Russians are focused to establish complete control over this territory. For example, for these purposes, during the previous night, the Russians attacked the city of Chiguyev with a significant number of drones, and as a result of Russian attack, they managed to destroy the oil depot. So fuel depot, this is the fuel depot we are talking about. Most likely the Ukrainians Russians were using or were planning to use this fuel depot to support their forces and contingent in the northeastern part of the Kharkiv Oblast. But now Ukrainians most likely will face some problems with logistics. The most important thing is that during the previous days, let's discuss this once again, the pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian resources confirmed that the Russians managed to break through Ukrainian defense along the border with the Russian Federation in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Milova. Furthermore, several sources and several military experts came to the conclusion that the next step of the Russians is to move further in the direction of Ambarne and in the direction of the settlements of Adradne and Balogovka. So with these attacks, the Russians would be able to connect and to combine their front lines, let's say along the river of Oskol and along the border. And this is about conclusions that were made by different mappers and by different military experts. As for the reality on the ground, today several independent sources reported that the Russians began their offensive operation from the settlement of Dvorechna in the northern direction. The sources reported that Russian sabotage and reconnaissance group were spotted in the village of Kutkovka, a gun battle in the area of Sportivnaya Street. At the moment, it is not yet clear what is was reconnaissance in force or an attempt to gain a foothold. So pro-Russian resources, several independent pro-Russian resources reported about very heavy clashes on the territory of the village of Kutkovka. So we can make a conclusion that most likely, first of all, the Russians will try to establish control over this village. This will allow the Russians to get another village where they will be able to concentrate their troops before further offensive in the northwestern direction. Furthermore, during the day, we got several reports that the Russian units began offensive operation from the village of Figilevka in the northern direction with the purpose to attack and to storm the settlement of Petroivanovka. So as for this, now we see that the Russians are trying to cut this triangle from the south, from the north, and from the east. Furthermore, this evening, we got a very interesting article that was published by the commander-in-chief of the armored forces of Ukraine. We're talking about Alexander Syrskyi. He made his own statement regarding the situation in the northeastern part of the Kharkiv Oblast. The most important thing from his update and from his report is that he talked with commanders from this direction to understand whether they need additional manpower or they have enough of everything to stabilize the situation and not to allow the Russians to break through this area. Anyway, as for now, it doesn't matter whether the Ukrainians are able to stabilize the situation or whether the Russians began another offensive operation. The most important is that the commander-in-chief of the armored forces of Ukraine, Alexander Syrskyi, was forced to pay attention to this area due to progress on the ground that the Russians managed to achieve during the previous 3 days. Most likely during the next days we are going to receive more and more updates from this area. And telling the truth, we believe that the Russians would be able to continue offensive, and as we discussed during the previous video, as for the first stage of possible Russian offensive operation in this area is to establish complete control over this territory. We are talking about the village of Veliki Bruluk. This is the biggest village exactly in the central part of this pocket, which will allow the Russians to control the most of the important supply lines in this area and to concentrate troops before further offensive operation in the direction of the city of Chuguyev, and not just in the city of Chuguyev. Exactly from these positions, the Russians would be able to continue offensive operation in the direction of Shevchenkova, in the direction of the city of Chuguyev, as we discussed a minute ago. So the Russians would be able to restore control over the territories they lost during the Ukrainian counteroffensive, Kharkiv counteroffensive operation of 2022. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Siversk direction. During the previous 24 hours, we got several icons in this area, and they are very important. First of all, we got this video. We have already discussed this video during the previous update. In this video, we can see how Ukrainians were bombing and attacking Russian units in different parts of this region, and several geolocations were located, and this is, for example, one of the points that was attacked by the Ukrainians. So based on this video, we during the previous hours, we adjusted this small pocket in Russian favor. We are talking about these through forest belts. Another important thing that during the previous day we got several reports, mainly from pro-Russian resources, independent pro-Russian resources, about the situation in the northeastern part of the city of Siversk. So, for example, this is the first article that was published by a very reliable pro-Russian resource. He made just one small and simple statement, and he said that Russian fighters began to enter the city of Siversk. So he didn't clarify where exactly the Russians entered the city of Siversk, and we added this icon softly. Maybe the Russians by the morning of the 5th of July entered the city of Siversk from the southeast. Maybe the Russians attacked and entered the settlement of Siversk maybe from the east. Maybe the Russians attacked the settlement of Siversk from the northeast. So by the morning of the 5th of July, we didn't know for sure. So we added this icon softly. But later, probably several hours ago, we got another article published by a very reliable pro-Russian resource. So let's read and discuss in details. Siversk. As of 10 a.m. of Moscow time, Russian assault forces broke through the Ukrainian armed forces defensive line on the eastern edge of the city overnight and secured their positions. There is no precise data yet on further advances in that sector. It is too early to speak of our entry into the city. So this pro-Russian resource reported that by 10 a.m. of Moscow time, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to take under complete control these territories. So first of all, we're not talking about this residential area of the northeastern part of the city of Seversk itself. First of all, we are talking about trenches and fortifications along these three lines outside of the city of Seversk in the northeastern direction. So once again, some very reliable pro-Russian resources reported that as a result of clashes during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to secure all these territories. So of course, we are waiting for additional changes on the ground. We are waiting for additional videos or geolocations, but obviously if the Russians by 10 a.m. of the 5th of July of 2025 took under control this territory, this means that most likely during the upcoming night between the 5th and the 6th of July of 2025, the Russians will try to enter the northeastern part of the city of Siversk itself. If this happens, we can start talking about, let's say, major offensive operation of the Russian forces in this area, and we can start talking about the beginning of the battle of the city of Siversk itself. And obviously, if the Russians indeed enter the northeastern part of the city of Siversk, and if the Russians are able to dig in deeper with the purpose to establish a foothold in this part of the settlement, this is going to be the beginning of complete collapse of Ukrainian defense to the east of the cities of Slovensk and Kramatorsk, and this is going to be the end of the entire foothold around the positions like Kremenная Forest, the city of Siversk, and for this entire pocket. So we are waiting for additional updates, and obviously if the Russians indeed answered these two lines, they answered them for a reason. We need to understand that it is very difficult to hold positions along this tree line right in front of this with the city of Siversk with its huge buildings. The only reason why you need to control the outskirts of the settlement only if you are planning to continue offensive operation further, because if the Russians try to hold these territories, let's say for another 1, 2, 3 days or a week, obviously they would be forced to fall back under the pressure of Ukrainian FPV drone operators that will attack them every single minute during the next days, weeks or hour or months or something like this. So we are waiting for a major battle for the city of Siversk these hours. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the area of the city of Konstantinovka. As we discussed in the previous video, the Russian sources published, the pro-Ukrainian sources, published this photo where we can see lots of strikes with drones. The western part, the southern, and lots of explosions, as you can see, took place in the Donbas occupation zone, so in the vicinity of the city of Pokrovsk and Konstantinovka. And today, the Russian resources published this video where we can see these attacks. In this video, we can see how Russia Russians using drones were bombing and attacking basically the line of combat contact between the Russians and the Ukrainians to the south and the southwest of the city of Konstantinovka. A lots of attacks, a lots of explosions. The Russians are trying to increase their firepower on Ukrainian positions, and we see that the Russians are pretty successful with this. Very interesting changes are coming from the city of Chasiv Yar. As we discussed in the previous video, the Russians secured almost completely this Cech number 2 micro district. There is just one micro district left for the armed forces of the Russian Federation, but today we got some changes on the ground in Ukrainian favor. More precisely, we are talking about the village of Nikolaevka. A few days ago, pro-Russian resources reported that the Russians managed to establish complete control over the Shevchenko micro-district and to move further in the northwestern direction and to answer and to almost complete the battle for the village of Nikolaevka. And for example, this is the situation on the ground on the 4th of July of 2025. According to several mappers, the Russians secured this territory completely, but as for the end of the 5th of July, we see that some territories most likely were restored by the Ukrainians, or the Russians didn't answer them at all. So we adjusted the map, so we adjusted the gray zone and contested area in between the city of Chasiv Yar and the village of Nikolaevka. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the South Donetsk or Dnipropetrovsk direction. As usually, we are getting lots of icons from this area because this is the area where the Russians always continue their offensive operation without stops, without any pauses, without thinking. They're moving, and moving. During the previous 24 hours, very heavy clashes were recorded in the area of Voskresenka, Mirnaya, Podubnaya, Tolstoy. Furthermore, several pro-Russian resources reported that the Russians are about to finish the battle for the settlement of Podubnaya, and most likely tomorrow or the day after tomorrow we're going to receive either both the confirmation of the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation about Russian complete control over this territory, and most likely we are going to get another video where we would see Russian soldiers raising Russian flags in different parts of the settlement. Furthermore, today we got report that the Russians and first groups of the Russian stormtroopers answered the village of Tolstoy. It is very interesting, but we don't receive anything from the village of Mirnaya. It seems that the Russians are trying to avoid battle for the village, trying to outflank the settlement from the north and from the south to create a situation when the Ukrainians would be forced to make a decision either to fall back from the village of Mirna without showing any resistance or to stay there and to be caught in cauldron by the Russians. The pro-Russian resources reported that they managed to capture some talks of Ukrainian forces on the ground, and according to information we have, the Ukrainians who are currently located on the territory of Mirna has already requested an order for evacuation. But once again, according to the same pro-Russian resources, they got only the rejection. So the Ukrainians are forced to stay in the village probably for another day or two. But obviously, the situation in this area can be resolved within even hours, not even days or weeks at all. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the area of Gulay Polya. I would like to remind you that during the previous days we were talking a lot about Russian progress in the village of Malinovka, and several pro-Russian resources reported that the village was secured completely, and based on these reports many mappers suggested the village of Malinovka under complete Russian control. But today we got this video, this geolocation where we can see how Russians were bombing and attacking the northern part of the village of Malinovka with artillery and FPV drones. So this is a proof that confirms that the Russians don't have complete control over the settlement of Malinovka, and then most likely the northern part is still under complete Ukrainian control. So based on this video, we have returned back the northern part of Malinovka under complete Ukrainian control. Now we have no doubts that Ukrainians are still in the northern part. As for the Zaporozhye direction, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special. The Russians are bombing and attacking the village of Plavny with artillery, with FAPs, with the cluster rounds, with the purpose to break through Ukrainian defense and to move forward in the northern direction, but as we can see, without any changes on the ground. Just the Russians are trying to break Ukrainian defense. Most likely it will take some days, and then the Russians will continue. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.